boy of Nazareth, the carpenter's shop. Jesus had always said he was going to be a carpenter like Joseph, so as soon as his school days were over, he went to the workshop to learn to work with wood. At first he watched Joseph, and it all looked so easy that the boy could scarcely wait until it was time for him to try. Then he found that it was more difficult than he had thought. The saw stuck as he was pulling it through a log of wood, or else the wood was tough and his plane would not go smoothly. But Jesus worked hard, and soon he was able to use all his tools almost as quickly and cleverly as Joseph himself. Then he began to make things, a gate perhaps for a farmhouse, or a door for a barn, or shelves for a shop, or a hoe for a man who worked in the fields. Later on he made the more difficult things, like yokes for the oxen and ploughs for the farmers. Everybody knew that Joseph's yokes and ploughs were just the very best that could be got, and very soon they came to know that those that Jesus made were better still, for everything that he did was perfect. After a while, Joseph was too old to work hard in the carpenter's shop, and then Jesus had to work harder than ever, for he had to make money to buy food and clothes for Mary and for all his younger brothers and sisters. But he was such a good carpenter that he always got plenty of work to do. Although he was a man now, and although he was so busy, Jesus always had time for his friends, and he had many friends amongst the little boys and girls of Nazareth. He was one of these big people who always understand. He never laughed at games or made the children think that they were silly. Instead of that, he used to have all sorts of ideas that made the games far better and jollier than they had ever been before. Often Jesus used to watch the children playing in the marketplace, and there was always such a happy smile in his eyes as he watched the little girls playing house. There was always a mother, of course, going to the well, sweeping the house and making the bread, and there was always a baby that had to be kept. The boys, too, played games. Sometimes they played with bat and ball. Sometimes they pretended they were merchants or kings or soldiers. But whatever it was, they never needed to explain to Jesus. He always knew all about it. Sometimes in his workshop, Jesus heard the sound of a merry little tune coming from the marketplace, and when he looked out, there he saw the boys and girls all joining in a gay procession. The first boy and the first girl were dressed in all the grandest clothes that could be found, for they were playing at weddings, and these two were the bride and the bridegroom, very, very important people. Then the tune would change, and the little piper would pipe a sad tune. Still the procession followed, but now they cried and wailed very sadly, for they were playing at funerals. Sometimes, when Jesus heard these little tunes, he looked out but saw no processions, for the boys and girls were standing about in little groups with sulky faces, and none of them would play. The piper played a merry tune, and they would not dance, and he piped a sad tune, and they would not cry. Then Jesus knew there had been a quarrel, and he knew too that before long the children would be coming slipping into his shop, for they always did that when they were tired or unhappy. And of course they came. They did not need to ask if they might, for they knew that Jesus was always pleased to see them, and they just waited for his happy smile to make them feel quite at home. There they sat on the floor. Some of them played with the lovely long curly shavings. Some drew things with their fingers in the sawdust. Some found little bits of wood and made houses and gardens and even castles out of them. But very, very soon after they came into that workshop, they had forgotten all about their quarrel and were the best of friends again. Sometimes when Jesus was not very busy, he used to pick up little bits of wood and cut out toys for his little friends. What joy it was to watch and see what was coming out of the bit of wood, as he shaped it with his clever fingers. "It's going to be a sheep," cried one. "No, I think it's going to be a fox," said another. "Look at its long nose." So they went on guessing until Jesus finished the toy. Sometimes it was a sheep and sometimes it was a fox, but it was best of all when he made 2 oxen, with horns and tails and everything, and a tiny little plough fastened to the yoke, which was fitted round their necks. Of course, it was not very often that Jesus had time to make these lovely things, but even when he was busy, some days he still had time to tell stories to these boys and girls that came to see him in his shop. And do you know, there was just nobody who could tell stories like Jesus. He told stories about birds and beasts and flowers. He told stories too about kings and princes, about fathers and mothers, and boys and girls. Some of the stories made you laugh and laugh, and others made you feel that you wanted to go and do big fine things, things that would make Jesus pleased, because he was such a big